Dr. James, and we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I am looking forward to sharing some of the ideas here, and hope some of them are of interest. You know, normally this time of year, then I can talk about how nice the weather is here in West Texas. But starting out this morning at 9 degrees, I don't have that much to brag about this time. So it's a good day to be on a webinar instead of driving. This presentation is actually one of my favorites because this gives me an opportunity to just kind of give you the top level from all the research that's been going on. Some are things, trends that we've known about for a long time. Some are newer, but it's just a way to give you that overview of everything we know about legacy fundraising, that is charitable estate planning fundraising from scientific research. And so we're going to look at those 10 points and all the research behind it. Now, before we get into some of the really practical stuff that I think will be helpful, we're going to, well, we're going to start with theory because I'm a professor and that's what I do. That's your penalty for asking a professor to come speak, that you're going to have to sit through a couple of minutes at least of theory before we get to the practical results. So, in other words, you can think of it this way. We're going to get to the very straightforward, like do this and don't do that, right? Like the famous book of Eat This, Not That. But first, I want to give you a little bit of the science behind why I'm making some of these suggestions. Now, why is it that I'm doing this? Well, I want to suggest to you that if you understand why people are behaving in a certain way, it's actually better than if I just give you the list of do's and don'ts, which we'll get to later. The point being that if you understand the why, you can apply that to a variety of circumstances, maybe circumstances that haven't even arisen yet, new media, new situations. And again, it is better than just a list because what worked for one person one time in one organization may not be universally true. But if you understand what's underlying these decisions, that can really help guide how you communicate and how you approach these. So, first, let me talk about psychologically something we need to recognize. And that is when we talk about planned giving, at least many of the instruments, or certainly legacy planning, estate planning, we are talking about the person's own mortality. Now, that is something that we can often miss. And the reason I say that is because what we know from experimental research is that people have these unusual reactions to being reminded of their own mortality. Okay? They don't have those reactions to the reality that other people are going to die. In other words, like I can go see an Avengers movie where half the universe dies and it doesn't really bother me at all. And sometimes we can miss this because as advisors or as fundraisers, we're not thinking about our own mortality when we present on these topics, right? But when we're presenting on these topics, if you are a client or if you are a donor, it's a very different experience because they are the conversation is about their own mortality. And regardless of the terminology or packaging that we use, our estate planning, our plan giving involves planning for one's own death. It's a strong reminder of the reality of our own mortality. And believe it or not, there's an entire field of experimental research that's devoted to the topic of how does it change our values and preferences when you remind people that they're going to die. I'm not making this up. This is true. This is an area called terror management theory. And no, I didn't make that up. That is really what it's called. But because of that, we have literally thousands of experiments, or at least over 1,000, that show us how people react to these reminders. And the reactions tend to fit into one of two stages of responses. The first stage response is called avoidance, and the second stage response is the pursuit of symbolic immortality, the idea that Okay, I admit it, I'm not going to be here forever, but some part of myself, my story, family, achievements, a community, my identity will continue to exist after the end of life. So the first response is avoidance. What does that actually look like when it comes to estate planning or charitable estate planning? Well, it can be expressed in a lot of ways, right? Distraction, I'm too busy to think about that right now, or differentiation, this doesn't really apply to me because I, exercise, I have good cholesterol, don't smoke, whatever the case may be. Or denial, those worries are overstated. Delay, I definitely plan to think about this later, or depart. I'm just going to stay away from that reminder. And if you've tried to talk to people about their estate planning, chances are you've run into these kinds of thoughts. Now, when people are not in that first stage, later comes the second stage defense, is that idea of a pursuit of symbolic immortality, that some part of my identity, my name, family, community, achievements, values, etc., will persist after the end of life. Now, we do see this in experiments that as personal mortality awareness grows, the desire for investing in future social impact becomes relatively more attractive. It also tends to increase people's support for their surviving in group and its community values. So, however they define my people, it will tend to increase their support for that group. All right. Well, I've got to say congratulations. You have survived the academic theory part of the presentation. So now I'm going to try to get a little bit more practical as we understand a bit about how to raise money this way. The first thing that I think is helpful to understand is that when we're talking about legacy fundraising and raising money, you raise money through legacy fundraising, but it's not just about the estate dollars. The reason is that if you have a donor who already cares about your cause, honestly, the single most powerful transformation you can make with that donor is to get them to consider their wealth as donation relevant rather than just their disposable income. Because most people, for their entire lives, will only think of charitable giving as something that comes from disposable income. And honestly, for most people, the first time they will ever make a commitment to share part of their wealth, not their disposable income, is when they do that in an estate plan. And once people make that commitment to make their wealth donation relevant, it can be transformational. Now, this is showing you from a nationally representative study of adults age 50 and above what happens to individuals after they add charity into the estate plan in their current giving. Now, these are the same people on the left-hand side in the white bars and on the right-hand side in the black bars. But after they add charity into the estate plan, their charitable giving goes up by about 77%. And I think this is related to that. Don has a great question here. Are required minimum distributions considered wealth? 100% yes, because where do those come from? Those come from an accumulated pile of assets. That's not a disposable income gift, right? It's not a checking account gift. In the same way, Don, we will see this same behavior the first time that somebody makes a gift of shares of stock rather than writing a check out of their checking account. Why? Because when I make that gift of a share of stock, what's my reference point? Well, it's now my stock portfolio. I am now wealth sharing, not just income sharing. In the same way, when I make that qualified charitable distribution, and so that's what I assume you're referencing here with the required minimum distributions. When I make that required minimum distribution, it is that qualified charitable distribution, excuse me, it is coming from a pile of wealth. Now, we actually have to take a second step with that. And the second step is this. We've got to constantly be reminding donors that the cap for these transfers from an IRA is not their required minimum distribution. It's the $105,000. And I think it's gone up a little bit this year. Last year was $105,000. It's inflation adjusted. Now, this is important because if somebody is not taking a tax deduction, then this is a smarter way to give because they're giving with pre-tax dollars. Don also asks about what about donor advised funds? And donor advised funds, different people use them different ways. For some people, they're just a pass through, right? They're just, okay, I'm going to stuff my disposable income gifts in here all at the end of the year so I can put it on my tax return for this year. And then I'm just going to sort of bleed it out over the next 6 to 12 months. A lot of people use them that way, in which case it's really just a pass through of disposable income gifts. Other people use it to accumulate larger amounts. So I would say that the answer to that question depends. And I think Dawn's sending that on a direct message. So if you didn't see her question, that's what I'm referencing there. So let's get to the top 10 rules. Number one rule, if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death. So the idea here is to understand that personal mortality topics are subconsciously aversive to most people, and we want to wrap them in other topics to sidestep that initial avoidance response. Now, it turns out this is a common theme in successful approaches to introducing planned giving. We need to have the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down. So, for example, we could do a presentation on charitable estate planning. And in fact, when I first started out in plan giving, that's what I did. I was working for a religiously affiliated college, and I did what my predecessor had done, which is to put together an estate planning seminar and present that in supporting churches. And I got to tell you, I put together a fantastic seminar. And both of the people that showed up for it agreed it was a great seminar. But I had to learn that if I wanted to get a larger audience, I needed to change the topic. I needed to not lead with death, which is what the estate planning topic was doing. And so in that particular case, because I was a lawyer and the religious setting, I gave presentations on Christians and the law, talking about religious liberties issues and then ending with stewardship or estate planning issues. Now, the interesting thing was not only did I get the big audience, but my sign-up rate at the end to have conversations about estate planning was just as high in that second group as with the first. There was another plan giving director for the Archdiocese in New Orleans who had the same experience. He started out giving estate planning seminars, very low attendance. Now, he wasn't a lawyer, so he changed his topic to senior concerns. And he would talk about, health-related issues, Medicare-related issues, and then at the end, he would have a section related to estate planning. He had the same experience, much bigger audience in that way. So you can get creative with that, tax-smart giving, and so we'll start out with current giving tips. Hey, giving appreciated asset gifts or qualified charitable distributions, and then planned giving tips. Hey, any of that IRA or 401k money that goes to the family, they got to pay income taxes on it. But any of it that goes to charity, there's no income taxes, right? So we start out, we don't lead with death. We kind of mix the projects up. Or the stories from the front lines, talk about the charity projects, but also the planned donors who support that. And even one suggestion kind of went a little too far, I think, but it was about putting on identity theft seminars that they then ended with estate planning. But hey, it worked just because you're not leading with death. Or if you think about how a lot of times people who are new to this space have problems with how do I ask people for a gift, right? They feel very uncomfortable about it. And so I like to recommend for folks that may have some discomfort with that is the 4S method. I call it the 4S method for 3 stories and then shut up. So for example, if I was talking to an alumnus from Texas Tech, at some point in the conversation, what's going to come up is what's new at the university. And I might say something like, we're excited about our new basketball coach. Season's going pretty well. I think we're going to be in good shape for the tournament. Lots of new construction in the West Side. We're over 40,000 students now, if you can believe that. Oh, and Mary Smith did a neat thing. Now, did you know Mary? She graduated 2 years before you. No? Well, Mary spent her career helping other people get their finances in order, and she recently signed a new will that one day will endow a permanent scholarship for our financial planning students. That's the fourth step, by the way. So notice what you've done here. If you have reached somebody at a point in their lives when they are interested in continuing this conversation, you've given them an opportunity to do that. If you've reached somebody at a point in their lives when they're not interested in continuing this conversation, you'll hear some response like, oh, so those new buildings, where would I park if I wanted to see them, right? And you might think, oh, I tried it and it didn't work. But what we have seen experimentally is you've actually accomplished the most powerful intervention to shift a person's attitude about including a gift in a will, which is to share a living donor story about someone like the donor who has included a gift in their will that, in this case, makes a permanent, lasting impact. So it's actually very powerful. And notice we don't lead with death. There's another way that you can not lead with death. So I'll share a story. I was working with a large international organization, and they decided that they wanted to go after gifts and wills. And so they were used to doing appeal letters. So they sent an appeal letter that was, let's just say, it very strongly led with death. Okay. And then you got the standard response cards, which is I've already included you with the gift in my will, or please contact me about my upcoming death. Um, well, I mean, they don't say that, but right? That's the idea. So they sent out 30,000 of these, and they got back none. Now, for those of you that don't do sophisticated statistical analysis like I do, I can tell you that's not a very good response rate. I mean, normally with these things, we see about 1 out of 1,000 or 2 out of 1,000, but that was not good. Here's the important part of the story. That same organization, a bit later, sent out a short one-page survey. That survey started with how the people were connected to the cause, which projects were of most importance to them. And then along the way, towards the end, many people like to support this organization in a variety of ways. Which of the following have you done or might you consider in the next few months? Gift by check, gift by credit card, gift by monthly commitment, gift in a will if you happen to sign a new will in the next 3 months, gift in a will in honor of a loved one, gift of real estate, gift of stocks. Here's the important thing. They were asking for exactly the same information because the options were, I have already done this, would consider it, or would like more information. But when they led with death, they got back avoidance. They didn't get back anything. If they instead buried the death question, where they talked about other things and then along the way mentioned the death-related topic, this organization got back a 22% response rate. So they went from 0 out of 30,000 to 22% response rate. And in fact, a year later, they mailed back to the non-responders and had another 18% response rate. So again, the idea is if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death. I love this story. This was a organization put on planned giving seminars, and nobody shows up. Very few people show up. And so they hire a consultant and say, consultant, how comes nobody's coming to our planned giving seminars? And the consultant says, well, I don't know. Let's have a focus group. So they get a bunch of donors in and they say, hey, folks, we need your help. We putting on these seminars and people aren't showing up. We want to know why. We want to talk to them about things like charitable gift annuities and what they can. The hand goes up. Talk to them about a what? Oh, a charitable gift annuity. That's how you can make a gift to the organization, but not worry about giving too much because it gives you lifetime income back. We didn't know if maybe we were getting too technical to talk about charitable remainder trusts or whether again, another hand, a what? Oh, a charitable remainder trust. That's where you take your asset, you can set it aside, sell it with no capital gains taxes, get payments off of it for life. Anything left over at the end of life supports the charity, but you get an immediate tax deduction. Okay. So here is the fun part. The organization got planned gifts the next day, charitable gift annuities, I assume, from people who had been in the focus group. And I love the conclusion of the article, which was this: like scientists who discovered a cure unexpectedly, we had inadvertently found our answer where we least expected it. The best venue to teach people about plan giving was not a workshop or a seminar on plan giving, but a focus group on why nobody will go to workshops or seminars on plan giving, right? The point is, we're doing something else. And along the way, we mentioned the death related topic. Right. In the same way, if you think about how is death insurance sold, it's like flood insurance, fire insurance. It's death insurance. We don't call it death insurance. We call it life insurance. And beyond that, most life insurance that's actually sold by a real person is not just pure death insurance. It also includes some investment components to it, whole life or universal life, so that I can begin the conversation talking about maybe planning for your kid's college education. And then along the way, I can say, now, if something happened to you, did you still want your kids to go to college or no? Oh, you did. Well, let's put in some protection for that, right? So the idea is we get a larger audience when we don't lead with death. Another experiment showed this with decisions on annuities. Changing the annuity description from each year you live to each year you live until you die, and also changing how much it pays if the annuity holder lives up to different ages, with depending on the age when the annuity holder dies, both increased death-related thoughts and resulted in lower interest in purchasing annuities. And now statistically, that was completely mediated by the change in death-related thoughts. When we lead with death, we're going to get a smaller audience because a big chunk of people respond to that with avoidance. Avoidance suggests that we don't want to think about it. We want to stay away from that. It suggests we don't want to admit the likelihood of impending death as a reason to act. Now, this is important because for the legacy fundraising, we not only have to move people from I don't want to think about it to, yeah, that's a good idea, but we also have to move them from, yeah, that's a good idea, to signing the document. So the issue is this: if people are generally resistant to facing their own mortality, if I'm not going to die tomorrow, why not deal with all of this later? Well, let's get creative. We don't motivate them to do it because you might get hit by a bus. We instead attach a non-death related motivation, maybe a non-death related negative outcome to putting it off or positive outcome to doing it now. What could that be? Well, for example, our campaign to reach 100 planned gifts and wills and trusts ends in 3 months. Won't you consider joining these others? You could do it later, but you're left out of the group. Or, we are offering a blank for anyone who signs up for an appointment tonight, or just the leadership. People really take their cue from leaders like you. Your action would motivate many of them to act. Now, notice we don't resist the idea that other people die. It's personal mortality that has that kind of negative effect. And here we're saying, hey, you're taking this leadership step can influence others to make this kind of a commitment. Or you can take this approach, right? To show a strong leadership commitment in this plan giving push, we want to announce board participation levels at the fall banquet. This is as simple as just getting online, adding in for 10% of an IRA. You can do it right here. Can we count you in? And then we give the option of I commit to complete that estate gift to the organization within 6 months. Now, what we're doing here is we're saying we know most people are going to respond with avoidance. And so we give them an opportunity to respond with avoidance because one expression of avoidance is delay. And so we're saying, well, within 6 months. Oh, okay. Well, that's more comfortable. Then that gives us the opportunity to follow up. hey, really appreciate your commitment to making this bequest gift. Can I check back in a month to see how the planning process is going? And so the idea being that we then have a motivation to do it where we don't want to violate the pledge. So the idea here is that we want that non-death related motivation. The second suggestion, which connects with not the avoidance response, but the pursuit of symbolic immortality, is to emphasize lasting social impact. Now, I've mentioned to you that if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death, but that doesn't mean we don't ever lead with death. If we've got a captive audience, like once they're in the room, we can be very blunt about death, because if they're a captive audience and they can't engage in avoidance because we've already got them, what's the only other response? We can't engage in avoidance. An increased interest in lasting social impact, an increased interest in pursuit of symbolic immortality, which is what we can offer with some of our giving opportunities. You know, the other reason why you might want to lead with death, if you say, I don't want the bigger audience, right? I only want those people who are ready to plan now. And so I'm going to lead with death and wait for life events, some external shocks, such as a negative diagnosis, to bring them to me. And that's fine as well. Now, with estate planning, when we want to present things to people that are going to be attractive, we want to present it in terms of permanence. So when people are facing their own mortality, anything that feels permanent becomes super attractive. And so in a charitable context, we see private foundations, other long-term plans become particularly attractive. As an estate planner, that's the motivation where we say, hey, if you don't put any instructions with your money, the heirs might blow it quickly. It could violate the client's values. But with planning, you can have a lasting impact that expresses the client's values. Now, we see this again and again, not only in experiments, but in real world behaviors, how permanence with charitable gifts becomes super attractive when there is a mortality reminder. Now, it turns out you can take advantage of this just by the words that you use. So this was kind of an interesting experiment. This was an experiment where people were asked about making a gift to a poverty relief charity. But that charity was described in one of two different ways. It was described as either meeting the immediate needs of people or creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future. Now, the way the experiment was set up is half the people were reminded of death and half the people of their own death, and half the people weren't. Now, for the people that weren't, we kind of have to have them go through something unpleasant as well. So the way that the research works is that you remind them of dental surgery, because that's unpleasant, but nobody's thinking they're going to die from dental surgery, right? So that's the normal group. For the group that is not reminded of their own mortality, by far, the better way to describe that charity was meeting the immediate needs of people. But notice, for the group that first was reminded of their own mortality, that actually completely flipped. And now you raised 3 times as much money per person by describing that organization as creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future. Now, I think it's super important to keep that in mind, because that tells us that the right fundraising message for the estate gift is not the same as the right fundraising message for the current gift, for the $20, the $50 gift, okay? So what that means is that beyond the language that we use, and obviously that experiment shows that just the language can be really powerful, is that structures can also be powerful. Lasting gifts, endowments, named buildings, scholarship funds, etc., to stable organizations tend to be particularly compelling. So the suggestion is to consider developing permanent giving opportunities especially for those mid-level bequest donors. Those that are making massive gifts, they sort of know that they can create their own private family foundation. They can create their own endowment. But start thinking about, how could we offer them scholarships, lectureships, annual performances, perpetual, whatever it might be. And the idea here being, like, even if you're a brand new organization and you say, oh, well, people are not going to trust us to be around for the next 50 or 100 years. No problem. Just work with your local community foundation and say, here's how you set up a fund that will benefit us. And if anything ever happens to us, it will benefit this same cause in the community, right? So you can borrow that permanence from, say, for example, your community foundation, because permanence is what pulls in those major life investment kind of estate gifts. We see it in some other experiments as well. This was an experiment on how can we encourage people to make a second memorial donation. So people typically make a gift, a memorial gift around the funeral for a loved one, and then they never make another one. So we were looking at how do we get people to make another one? And one of the things we found is, hey, if you added a recognition goal, and this was recognition for the deceased person, that this is the total amount that's been given. If we reach this amount, then this is the recognition they'll receive. That helped a bit. But what massively increased not only the likelihood of the second gift, but the intended size of the second gift was when we added a permanence goal. In this case, it was reporting this is the level of gifts that have been given to this point, and this is what it'll be used for unless total gifts exceed $10,000, at which point this fund will become a perpetual scholarship fund. Notice this is not an estate gift. This is a memorial gift. But anytime we are in that death reminder context, what becomes important is permanence. Permanence becomes super attractive. The third suggestion is this, to present a social norm default. This is the idea that people like me do things like this. Now, we see this in other death-related tasks. For example, if we look at the effective consent rates to organ donations across different European countries, we find that countries where you check the box to opt in to organ donation have really low consent rates, and countries where you check the box to opt out of organ donation have really high consent rates. And the reason is that when we have a death-related topic, the default, or what we call the social norm, what do most people like me do, becomes super powerful. It's part of this idea of pursuit of symbolic immortality. We want to be remembered well. And so what will they think about me, or what will they think about me when I'm gone, becomes really important. Let me show you how powerful the social norm is in this estate planning context. So this was an experiment where 3,000 people 3,000 people were going through their normal estate planning process. Unbeknownst to them, they were assigned to one of three groups. One had no reference to charity. One had a, would you like to leave any money to charity in your will, as one extra question. And the third group got an extra question, but with a social norm statement. Many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. And notice what happens. We get a threefold increase in the number of people who are leaving actual gifts in their actual will documents as a result of that single sentence. Now, you notice it uses two sentences, but I broke them apart and tested them separately. It's the first sentence that's driving all the results, not the second one. So we double the results just by asking the question. What does this tell us? You need to stay top of the mind, right? People have a lot of things they're thinking about in this when they're going through this process. If you're not top of the mind, you'll get left out just because they didn't happen to think of you. And then the social norm statement. Now, that study was done in England, so I replicated it here in the US, and you can see that when we add that phrase, many people like to leave a gift to charity in their will, it dramatically increases the interest. So the next question is testing charitable gift annuity messages. So we tried to look at, was it better to talk about what you could do with a gift annuity, or to talk about what Sarah had done? And it turns out it was better to talk about what Sarah had done. Then we showed people a picture of Sarah, and our results got worse. So that then led to the question, what's the problem with the donor picture? Is it just this photo? Is it the donor age? Is it photos in general or what? So, of course, being a researcher, let's test a bunch more Sarahs with the identical language. And what I'm showing you here is I'm putting a box around the best performing Sarah based upon the age of the person who's answering the question. And notice that we get this result that similar age donor photos did better. And in fact, when we compared them to a generic picture, this is the picture we used, or text only, similar age donor photos did better than text only or a non-donor photo. Now, here's the important part. It's not just about age matching. The association was completely explained by the answer to one question. How much do you identify with Sarah? Either she is not at all like me, or she is a lot like me. And if the person felt that the example was like me, then they were interested in the gift, much more likely to be interested in the gift than if it's a person who's not like me. Another experiment showed this where students were walking across a university in Sweden and they were asked for a small gift. If they were just asked, 40% gave. If they were asked, but also told 73% of university students in Sweden who were asked for this gift made one, then that increased their willingness to give. So instead of 40% giving, 60% gave. But it went up even further if they were told that 73% of students at that university who were asked for a gift made one. And then the compliance rate went up to about 80%. Again, it's this idea that social norms are more powerful when examples are like me. The four suggestions to advance the donor's life story. Some of you know that part of my research here is, in fact, in the Texas Tech Neuroimaging Institute, where we stick people in brain scanners and we have them do their estate planning. So what we've learned from that, hey, if there's any neuroimagers in the audience, these are some of the results that we got, is that people actually are engaging in visualized autobiography when they decide to include a charity into their estate plan. We see this with other kinds of research as well. Dr. Claire Routley had in-depth interviews with donors. And here was the summary of her research. When discussing which charities they had chosen to remember, there was a clear link with the life narratives of many respondents. And so then taking that, we could actually take that and use it to see how do we build the best performing description of a planned gift, in this case, a gift and a will. It turns out that if we put this phrase onto the end of the description of the gift, it bumps up interest in every kind of gift that has an end of life component. So this is the, instead of make a gift to charity in your will, make a gift to charity in your will to support causes that have been important in your life. Why are we doing that? Because the neuroimaging says it is this visualized autobiography that triggers the decision. We are asking the question in a way that's going to trigger that visualized autobiography. In other tests, when we tried to see what messages increased interest in a gift, it was living donor stories. People like the donor who have made these kinds of gifts were very powerful. We need to ask about how the cause or the organization is an important part of my life story. We want to find out what is their connection to the organization. We want gifts that advance what I like to call the donor's hero story. And in fact, in experiments, we find that people's attraction to personal heroism goes up dramatically after they're reminded of their own mortality. The other thing here is that if you're interested in big gifts come with lots of instructions. Instructions make the gift compelling. They reflect the donor's values, the donor's life story, and the donor's identity. Now, this is nothing new. In two studies of wills from the 1800s, charitable bequests were restricted in 14% of small cash gifts, 58% of real estate or large cash gifts, and 70% of gifts of a share of the entire estate. And what we know experimentally is that gift restrictions, allowing people to put instructions with their gifts, actually make the gifts larger. Now, of course, the most extreme version of gift instructions are foundations, funds, and trust, right? A private foundation can be pages of detailed instructions controlling the gift for decades or even generations. And here's the thing. If you want to know what is it that motivates massive donations of wealth, in estate giving, that's actually an answered question. If we move back to the years when our exemption levels were smaller, so we could see estates of 5 million and above, for estates of 5 million and above, the share of charitable dollars going to private family foundations was 70% in one year, 78% in another. So that shows us what big gifts look like. Big gifts come with instructions. That's what makes them compelling. So we can actually get into these conversations to move beyond the pat on the head gift by asking, have you ever thought about how you'd like your gift to be used? And then we can share stories about planned gifts from other donors that accomplish something specific that is also lasting. Now, the great thing about sharing those stories is if you've got a specific project or goal, you now have a reason to talk about price tags. The fifth suggestion is to encourage tribute gifts and wills. Now, we did see a lot of people mentioning this when they explained why they picked the organizations that they picked. So we set up an experiment where we asked people about, in some cases, did they have a living friend or family member? In some cases, did they have a deceased friend or family member who would have appreciated their support of this organization? If so, tell us about their connection. And then we would ask them the bequest question, which we'd already asked them before, but this time about a bequest gift honoring that friend or family member. And what we got was a dramatic increase in the interest in leaving a gift for those who were reminded of a family member connection. So it's actually real simple if you want to add this idea. If you've got your standard checkbox of I've already included your organization with the gift in my will, just add a line that says my gift is in checkbox honor of, checkbox memory of, person and relationship. Just letting people know that this is a possibility in some experiments we've run increases the interest in that gift for a segment of people. The sixth suggestion is to use family words, not formal words. Now, this is a temptation when we get into planned giving because we're talking about law and tax stuff. So we often want to use those formal words, but family language is the stories and simple words is what's going to motivate the giving. And you'd seen this result before where using technical terms, bequest rather than gift in a will, reduces interest. In the same way, if we use identical descriptions of a charitable remainder trust, one beginning with the phrase make a gift and the other beginning with the phrase make a transfer of assets, the interest is almost double the share who are interested now if we drop that transfer of assets language when we just use make a gift. Describing a gift annuity, we compared make a gift with this phrase, which I actually lifted from a gift annuity brochure that was used by one of the consulting companies, and the results were even worse when you use that technical term. In another set of studies, we found that actually it's better just to describe the gift. If you're describing a charitable remainder trust, don't even call it a charitable remainder trust when you're introducing it. Just describe the gift, because using that formal term when we're introducing the concept actually dramatically reduces interest, and we see this pretty consistently. So what is the best front door phrase to get people to read about planned giving? So this was the setup for the experiment, and here's what we found. If you said, "Hey, do you want to read about planned giving?" 4% say yes. If you say do you want to read about other ways to give smarter? 20% say yes. Now, this can't just be clickbait. They've got to expect to read what they're going to get. So we then asked them, which of the following 12 types of planned giving information did they expect to read when they clicked on that button? And it turned out that when they clicked on other ways to give smarter, they were just as likely to expect that broad range of planned giving information as when we use the term planned giving, right? But other ways to give smarter leads with value, and it also communicates with donor language rather than insider language. A few statistics I want to end with. One is don't count it and forget it. When we look at the retention rates for a charitable component in an estate plan over a 10-year period, it's about a 55% retention rate, and we can track that loss rate over time. So since we know count it and forget it doesn't work, what should we do? Well, we've got to recognize that a bequest commitment is just the beginning of the process that leads to the estate gift, not the end. Now, it's great to get in the plan early because earlier charitable plans signed earlier do produce larger gifts if they stay in or if they return later. This also leads to the eighth suggestion: don't go radio silent at the critical moment. Now, when do plans change? Top 10 factors predicting when the charitable plan will be added. And most of these fit into the category of either family structure changes or death becomes real. So approaching death, diagnosis with cancer, decline in self-reported health, diagnosis with heart problems, stroke, becoming widow, widower, divorce, first grandchild, all fit into those categories. Then we look at the top 10 factors predicting when charitable plans are dropped, and they're almost identical factors. So basically what this tells us is that plans destabilize when death feels near or family structure changes. Now, in a 5% national sample of Australian records, they found that 60% of charitable wills were signed within 5 years of death. Non-charitable wills tended to be much older. We see that in the US data as well, where the majority of charitable plans, of actual decedents who distributed charitable dollars, the majority of those decedents added the charitable component at some point within the last 5 years of life. And that is true for about half the gifts as well. Well, here's the issue. Most charities go silent right at that most important point of decision. Why? Because they're communicating with their oldest friends based upon recency of donation. And what we know, this is showing the behavior of those decedents, the lifetime behavior of those decedents who actually transfer dollars to charity at death. And notice what happens in those last 2 to 5 years of life. The likelihood that they're giving, certainly the likelihood that they're volunteering, goes down and down and down. So if you're communicating with your oldest friends based upon recency of donation, you're kind of doing it in exactly the wrong way. Now, we had a study where 10 of some of the largest Australian charities provided data from their legacy societies, and among 700 known decedents who had confirmed that they had a planned bequest gift during life, only 65% actually generated anything. Now, this is a 65% is a maximum because there may be some decedents we didn't know about clearly that they didn't generate any gift. Now, the overall lost gift rate was 35%, as you saw, but different organizations' lost gift rates varied from a low of 17% to a high of 60%. What was the driver? Well, the average loss rate was only 25%, 24% when the charity had had at least one communication with the decedent within 2 years of the end of life. It more than doubled, 48%, if they had not. So the point is, do legacy societies work? Well, if it's an excuse to keep in contact with people, then they do work. But if we're not staying in contact, then they don't. Bottom line, don't ignore your oldest supporters. Keep in mind that old is older than you think as well, and that's because wealthy people die old. Wealthy charitable bequest donors, they die even older. And so what we see when we look at what was the age that the person signed the document that actually controlled the dollars, 76% of the charitable dollars signed by will documents are controlled by will documents signed in the 80s, 90s, or older. If you've got a group of donors and you want to know, hey, at what age for those donors will I have received half of the charitable estate dollars from that group? Well, in the more recent, in the Australian study, it was age 90. In a US study, it was age 88. So somewhere around age 88 to 90 is when you will have gotten half of your dollars. Okay. Much older age of transfer, wealthy people tend to live longer. Plans destabilize as the end of life approaches, and we see this from all the data. So for those 75 and above with lifetime connections, stay top of the mind. The score doesn't count until the clock runs out. I want to make just a couple of comments before I open it up for questions, comments, thoughts people have, and that is two other statistical suggestions. One is, who are we targeting? The 3 C's: childlessness, consistency, and capacity. So just to show you some examples among those who have will or trust documents, age 55 and above, if they're childless, 50% are leaving, are including charity. If they've got grandchildren, it's about 8%. It's a huge factor. It's one of the reasons why this baby boomer growth is going to be such a massive impact in the future for charitable estate gifts. It's not just that they're bigger, it's that they're dramatically more likely to be childless. And we already see this in the behavior on the propensity for people to include a charity in their estate plan. And so, how do we predict who's actually going to transfer gifts to charity at the end of life? The top 10 predictors of who actually will do this: consistency in giving, childlessness, did they ever make a big gift, and consistency in reporting a funded trust. That's because many times will documents, they have the gift in it, but the will documents don't control anything. And that's why the final suggestion, we need to go beyond the will. First, the share of people who have will documents is going down, even though among those who have will or trust documents, it's going up. That means that it's basically flat, the share who both have the documents and have the charitable component. Now, what we're seeing is that the use of funded trust is going up, but the use of will documents is going down dramatically. Why is that? I'm going to blame your neighbor to the north, where I went to law school, because when I graduated from law school back in 1994, it was the only state in the union that allowed transfer on death deeds. Now, this is a big deal because if you can TOD the house, then the will document for many people is not going to control anything. Right? There's that you just TOD everything. I mean, the bank accounts already have TODs on them. The brokerage accounts, where the life insurance has beneficiaries, your IRA has beneficiaries, right? Now, this continued to grow 2000, 2005, 2017. You guys are now the only holdouts west of the Mississippi, just about. But this increase in TODs and certainly with the real estate TODs has changed whether or not the will documents control anything. And so when we look at what ultimately happened to those written and witnessed will documents reported during life, when the decedents, when the heirs were contacted, well, in only 38% of the cases did that will document control anything. In most of the cases, the heirs said, "Oh yeah, he had a will, but no, we didn't use it." The will document is just there as a backup document in case there are any assets that are solely titled in the name of the decedent, and you've got to change the title on those. That's why you have to have the will document. For most people, they said, we didn't use it because the estate was otherwise distributed. That's where we're getting a lot of those other kinds of transfers. Funded trust, much more likely to actually control the estate because people know I've got to retitle it. This is one of the reasons why one of the massive indicators of whether somebody will actually transfer charity money to charity at the end of life is whether or not they had a funded trust. Because oftentimes, if they have a will document, they say, yeah, I've got charity in my estate plans right there in the will document, but they don't realize that their will document controls nothing. So having these titling conversations, talking about things like, hey, if you leave that money to in the IRA or 401k to family members, they have to pay income taxes on it. Any of that you name our organization for, there's no income taxes. What we're doing there is we're beginning to talk about titling, which becomes more and more important in our kind of fragmented estate planning world. Well, folks, that was a real quick overview on a bunch of different stuff. I do want to say I share not only, obviously, I'm sharing this slide deck, I share all of my stuff for free. So slides, videos, papers, books, just connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll send you a list of everything essentially that I have ever done. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, or with this size of group, if you feel like unmuting yourself, have a conversation, we can do that as well. So hope some of this was of interest, and thanks for the hand claps there, Reed. Appreciate that. Let's see if we're getting some in the chat, some through direct messages. Yeah, so one of the questions is when we're looking at that influential language, do you think we could add estate planners to add this language? I think the critical thing to pull out of that is for estate planners to know they need to ask the question. They don't need to ask it in a persuasive manner necessarily, because we're more than doubling the share of people who are including gifts in their estate planning documents just by asking the question, right? So the problem isn't that people don't want to leave the gifts. The problem is that they don't happen to think about it. Now, as an estate planning attorney, I would say you have to ask the question because there's this whole wonderful world of opportunities that open up if a person says, yeah, I'd like to include a gift to charity, right? That's the wonderful world of planned giving that we're all familiar with, right? And so I don't think that that you would say, hey, phrase your question this way, because that's not really part of their goal. I think the goal is make sure you ask the question. Another direct message came in about looking for permanence for different organizations. Again, two different ways to get to permanence. One, the cheap way, which is to just use that in your language to describe the impact of your cause, right? The other, which is the actual structure way, you're probably going to look at some flavor of endowing some part of your operations. And it needs to be something that is visualizable, that is personally meaningful for that person, but including that as an opportunity, scholarship, professorship, lectureship, whatever it might be, that's structural permanence, and that tends to be attractive. Hey, Kristen, your question is, sorry if you covered this, had to step away. Is there any research on effectiveness of younger donors, including charity, in their first will or estate plan when children are born, et cetera? So here's what we get from that. Number one, we know that count it and forget it doesn't work. So we don't try to get into that plan simply because we know, oh, once you're in, you're always in, done deal, move on. That's not how it works, especially as people enter the age 55 and above, and especially in the last 5 years of life. Massive fluidity in the charitable estate component. So we know that that is the case. However, there's two reasons why we want to get in the will early. One, we know from the data that if you get in the will early, that those gifts, if they stay in, they will tend to be bigger. Or, in fact, even if they disappear and then come back later, they will tend to be bigger. The other reason why we might want to get in the will early is because this can change the donor mindset. One of the things that I can tell you about that gift in a will is that that is not a gift of disposable income, right? It is a gift from their accumulated wealth. And the more we can start shifting donor mindset to wealth sharing rather than just income sharing, the more we have the potential for those major life investment gifts that can really transform an organization. So I would say it's helpful to do for both of those reasons, but not necessarily helpful to do just in the sense of, hey, we can count it and forget it, declare victory, and move on. We do that for other reasons. You're welcome. You're welcome.